And the best to last.
I won't take that personally, Mr. President. Deputy President.
Sorry, I thought you were the last.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise, of course, to support the Transport Administration Amendment Closure Railway Line at Newcastle Bill. I'm going to talk at a higher level about this bill, about the urban planning principles involved, rather than the conspiracy theories that the opposition have spoken to. The new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, said the most valuable capital in the 21st century is not financial capital, it is human capital. This bill builds upon the Baird government's investment in human capital, the human capital of Newcastle. Our cities must be designed for human capital and to the human scale. Now, the famed Danish urban Professor Jan Gehl, urbanist, said in his landmark book, used by most urban planners around the world today, Cities for People, quote, "Neither the city planners nor transport planners in the past put city space and city life high on their agenda, and for years there was hardly any knowledge about how physical structures influence the human behaviour. Now, after many years, a great deal of knowledge has been amassed on the contention between physical form and human behaviour." And he concluded, "It is now generally accepted that city life and regard for people in city space must have a key role in the planning of cities." I know this is hard for you to comprehend because it's a higher level. In this vein, the transport and ultimately the city restructuring of Newcastle is guided by the new urban philosophy of Jan Gehl and contemporary designs of cities and urban renewal. And I say that because just as the transformation of Sydney CBD, just as a... Mr. Deputy President.
Point of order.
Point of order from the Honourable
Thank you.
Mr. Pearce.
I can't hear the speaker, and it's an erudite speech. With the Greens who expect to be given the opportunity to say whatever they like, whenever they like in silence, they are there, gathering away on their little bench.
Order. There is a point of order that the member be heard in silence, and everyone, as passionate as they are about this issue, will give each member their right to speak and be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. As I was saying, and Gehl has worked on the City of Sydney's project for light rail for George Street, which of course Labor supported before the election, now opposes. They seem to have an issue around light rail. He's worked on the revitalisation of Melbourne, which has transformed that city. He's working on Parramatta and indeed consulting to Christchurch and many other cities. So that philosophy is certainly guiding and renewal of many cities of the world. And I have a great interest in urban design and renewal, having been very involved with the City of Sydney's work on light rail, which has ultimately led to the government's partnership. Now, Newcastle Urban Transformation and Transport Program, of which the light rail project is a key part, encapsulates this attitude to city planning and how our cities should look in the future. Now, cities where people and human scale are driving the principles. In the recess, I took the opportunity to spend a few days in Newcastle, specifically to study this proposal. I met with advocates, I met with opponents, I met with organisations involved with tourism, I met with the government, I met with the council, and I met with the university. And members will not be surprised that I walk the talk. I caught the train to Newcastle and alighted at Hamilton, where I joined the very efficient bus service with the other passengers, then through the city, through the streets of the city. And one of the things I discovered, and I've been to Newcastle quite a few times, but not recently, is that it's an incredibly dynamic city, and it's very much, you discover that from a bus or ultimately a light rail in the city streets. There are many beautiful buildings. There are many beautiful buildings from ornate heritage styles and heritage buildings. I know the member, Honourable Mark Pearson, would be aware of that as being a former resident. And it's a largely intact street grid which was designed in 1823 by Henry Dangar. Now, the grid has helped create what Elizabeth Farrelly, who I'm not known to quote, she wrote in the Herald, it's one of the country's, maybe the world's most spectacular sited towns. And of course, that site is largely severed from its wonderful working river port, and I'll return to that in a minute. Now, the grid flows down from the... I'm very interested in how the Greens collectively interjecting when I'm trying to talk at a much higher level for them about this debate. I'll come to the conspiracy in a minute.
Point of order, the Honourable Penny Sharp.
Given that the government members don't seem to be calling points of order, I will call this point of order for the member, which is that there is a lot of interjections and it is hard to hear the member, and he should be allowed to be held in silence and not have to interject to.
I'll ask members.
Other interjections should be from this side of the House.
Further to point of order, the
Dr.
President
Phelps.
has made numerous rulings in relation to not merely witty interjections, but the sort of wall of noise interjections whose sole purpose is to divert the speaker from the speech before them. He has indicated that when people do that, they should be placed on a call to order, and I would certainly recommend that course of action be undertaken in relation to interjections.
Thank you. Look, I have been pretty gracious, and I know last night it got a bit out of hand, the cross-chamber noise, so I'll just ask members to be a bit more courteous and allow the speaker to be heard in silence.
Thank you, members and Deputy President. So the grid flows down towards the Hunter River from high on the hill, and just before it reaches the foreshore it stops. And it's cut short by the heavy rail line, a mess of pedestrian fences, overpasses, walls and other visual clutter, including building walls, that would otherwise ruin a clear connection to the working river. Now, I just want to touch on why is the river there. And while I was in Newcastle and I was visiting the council, I saw a photograph of the river. In fact, I think I put it on Facebook at the time of that peninsula of the river, the turn of last century, and you can see clippers in there on ports, on wharves, loading coal, and the heavy train line is there for transporting coal and probably grain to load onto clippers. And as it evolved, that line provided workers for the shifts to work on in the shipping area and BHP and so forth along the wharf. And so it has evolved. And I see this truncation, this shortening of the line as part of that evolution. Now, Newcastle is not unique being severed from its waterway by its heavy rail line. The only, and I talk about my experience at Liverpool, it's separated from its city by a rail line. And of course, I guess the most well-known one is Melbourne, separated from its river by its rail line. But the advantage that Newcastle has is it's a dead-end rail line and it can be shortened. The other rail lines are through rail lines, and unless, of course, you go down the path, as the Green suggested, of the burying rail lines and so forth, you really can't separate or rediscover your waterways. And the waterways have changed. Now, Newcastle is rediscovering it is blessed with beauty and with natural and built environments. And I visited the Newcastle Museum, which reopened its doors at the site of the old Honeysuckle Railway workshops in 2011. And it shows what can be done with the built environment Newcastle, and that leads to what can be done with the Newcastle Rail Station in the future. And at the other end of the town, the Anzac Memorial Walk opened in April 24th this year. It runs from the top of the hill along the cliff tops to Bar Beach, and what an amazing, spectacular tourist attraction that is, dedicated to our Anzacs. And whilst these projects are clear standouts, Newcastle needs our support to make the transition from being a city focused on mining to one based on high-value knowledge jobs like tourism, education, medicine and research, and they're emerging in that economy now. Newcastle needs to have a well-connected, highly livable urban centre, essential for attracting and keeping students and workers and high-valued residents. And as our Prime Minister said, livable cities are one of our greatest social and economic assets, and this goes to that outcome. Now, the bad government's getting on the job. We've already committed $1 billion to infrastructure projects in the Hunter region since 2011. The Newcastle Urban Transformation and Transport Program has been estimated to deliver the New South government's $460 million commitment to revitalise the city. And while I was in Newcastle, I was advised that, generally speaking, the government's investment results in a 7 times multiplier from the private sector over a decade. So that's a very significant investment to the future of Newcastle. I noted when I was there were 6 pedestrian crossings made across the rail line with bitumen and grass, which were constructed by the council with some pride. And I saw the engagement of the community crossing those, and the businesses I spoke to on the other side of the rail line, on the harbour side of the rail line, reported a real positive impact of that permanent closure. I'll touch on the $73 million contract for the new Wickham Transpender change. I note that there was some movement while I was there, or just before I got there. The government had, through a difficult process, had won the tender to purchase the neighbouring site, which is called the Store, which was in receivership, and that provides a tremendous opportunity for even greater interchange, transport interchange process with light rail and bus and indeed private cars parked there to really provide a world-class interchange proposal, and I've seen some of those in Europe, which really become a destination in themselves. The design Newcastle study, let me talk about that, because I heard earlier that there was no consultation, but that's just not true. Aside from the ongoing media debate and consultation in the Parliament process, which is a form of consultation, there was a consultation conducted over 2 months with over 950 stakeholders, including individuals, community groups, local council and representatives from the government agencies participated. 950 people. While I was in Newcastle, I heard the local Greens on the radio criticising that the consultation was too expensive. So one hand you hear here we had no consultation, but up in Newcastle they say it's too expensive. But the one thing they can't say is that there wasn't consultation. Robust consultation, extensive consultation, broad-based consultation run by an independent consultants is not cheap. I've been involved in much of that, but it's robust, and no one can just decline to say it didn't happen. So I just point out some of the highlights of that consultation. It found that the Newcastle and the Hunter community supports urban renewal in Newcastle and the city centre, is seeking big ideas to revitalise the city centre, supports a mix of housing types in the city centre, supports the reuse of public buildings such as the Newcastle railway station, supports the development in the rail corridor where that development brings into the city centre and aids in the creation of real jobs, supports temporary or permanent structures in the rail corridor to activate the space and create connectivity between the city and the waterfront, and supported the introduction of light rail and the truncation of the heavy rail. Novocastrians understand that it is the heavy rail which divides the city. The heavy rail line does not allow for the kind of pedestrian and vehicle access needed to activate the waterfront. Because light rail uses an extensive existing street pattern, it can become a proper part of the built fabric of the city in a way heavy rail cannot. Light rail does not need over-engineered pedestrian brick walls. Light rail does not need the large mortar and brick railway stations which were built, and I visited those, built to serve the workers going to the ports to work as much as it was to serve the city. All the evidence suggests that people take ownership of their city's light rail, as we've seen in our city with the light rail out to the inner west, and embrace their light rail because it's integrated rather than separated from the urban existence. Light rail Newcastle would, for example, take the number of active stations in the urban centre from 1 to 4, providing greater accessibility for people of Newcastle. Instead of having steps or lifts or retrofitted accessibility, which is never good enough, it will be at grade, and which is a huge win for those less mobile. And I do note that whilst I obviously arrived and departed mid-morning from Newcastle, that those getting off the train onto the bus largely were senior citizens. And so accessibility will be an issue, a very important issue for the light rail, and it will provide direct access to the city for them to visit the services they're going to. Connecting the city to the transformed areas along the city's waterfront by removing the heavy rail barrier will be a catalyst to revitalising the city and will ensure the CBD retains its rightful place as the capital of the Hunter. Now, experiences in other parts of the world tell us that light rail increases public transport patronage, and again, don't have to go to other parts of the world, just look to the inner west, to the light rail there. Delivers, well, you of course, you oppose light rail in the CBD of Sydney now, you promised it when you're running for Newtown. Delivers benefits to landowners and creates flow-on effects in the diversity of the economy, improving livability, increasing sustainability of cities. This is the vision we have for Newcastle. Now, this is a prime example of what is known as transport-oriented development, TOD. Now, I just want to put to bed two conspiracies that are brought today. First of all, the corridor conspiracy. Now, I think I've demonstrated in the information I provided to the House that the corridor itself, if it became the light rail corridor, doesn't really answer the question of urban renewal and integration with the streets of Newcastle and activating the streets, activating the public and embracing the public with the light rail. Light rail is best in an urban environment. And when I was involved with the light rail project of the City of Sydney, I remember Lord Mayor Clover Moore wanted a tunnel from Central all the way up to Moore Park, so it didn't tunnel. Indeed, so that it didn't go up Devonshire Street. But I opposed that because, indeed, Devonshire Street fundamentally will activate that light rail. And I know from my work at the Centennial Park Moore Park Trust when I was on there that there were concerns about the light rail going through parklands because, as with the busway, pedestrians at night can walk into those. And indeed, so the issue is it's a safer, more integrated transport form if it's actually part of an urban environment. Now, perhaps Labor might like to take a leaf out of the Union's book for this one.
Hit us with it. Come on.
Well, the example goes straight to the hypocrisy of the Labor Party and indeed the Greens on this plan. Now, the rail, tram and bus union's submission to, in the other places, inquiry into the utilisation of rail corridors said, 1. Constructing high-density urban developments, both commercial and residential, in close proximity to local transport opportunities, provides an alternative to automobile usage. And 2. TODs do not only turn a healthy revenue for local communities, they address head-on the negative externalities related to excessive car use, greenhouse gas emissions, urban sprawl, high living costs, traffic congestion and noise pollution. That's in support of transport-oriented developments. Now, perhaps Labor would like to take a leaf out of their book. Now, the local member in the other place for Newcastle has held multiple positions as he continues to serve on Newcastle Council with a conflict of interest. On the 22nd of September, he voted for a mayoral minute, which called for the expansion of the light rail project for the council to collaborate with Transport for New South Wales to establish an integrated transport management plan, including forward planning for the next stages of any light rail project. So, in one place, he's saying he's opposed to it, and in the council, he votes with all the councils, including the Greens, unanimously for the Lord Mayoral minute.
Point of order from the Honourable Penny Sharp.
The member's speech has traversed some quite interesting facts, but he is now straying well outside the standing orders in relation to speaking about members in the other place. If he wants to have a go at them, he can do that through a substantive motion. This is not the place and is well outside the lead of this bill to be going down this path.
Yeah, on the point of order, Dr. Peter Phelps.
It's perfectly valid to point out inconsistency in arguments with these people who seem to be for and against a proposal at one stage or another.
To the point of order, then Volts.
The reality is that he cannot impugn improper motives of the member in the other chamber. He's making an imputation against a member in the other chamber, and that member should have the right to respond to that through a substantive motion, which is why the standing order says so.
And further to the point of order, Deputy President, there can be no imputation or motion when the member is simply quoting what the other said.
Order. I've been listening carefully, and the member is suggesting his speech has got research in it. But I do take on board this standing order, basically imputations on other members. Never mind the members sitting to my left in the President's gallery. But look, I'd ask the member just to get back on line. I think he's made his point.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Indeed, just pointing out the voting record. So clearly there's some confused messaging coming out there. The Greens in particular have talked big on the decline of mining in the Hunter and their well-known opposition to coal, but they have failed monumentally to understand the local context of this opportunity that light rail provide a rebirth in Newcastle and different types of employment and growth. So if you want high-value jobs in services industry away from coal, you need to be supporting light rail for Newcastle. With those few words, I commend the bill to the House.